Marcus Hale and Arben Kodra had one goal: total control. Across oceans and continents, their war would leave warehouses burned, shipments vanished, and secrets exposed. An invisible battle no one saw coming. Please subscribe and share for daily new update of gang crime story and watch till end. The war did not begin with gunfire or arrests. It began with silence. In the early months, nothing appeared out of place to the public. Cargo ships continued to arrive at American ports on schedule, warehouses remained active, and companies linked to overseas trade reported normal profits. Yet beneath this calm surface, a hidden conflict was slowly crossing the ocean. What had started years earlier in Liverpool's shadowed streets was no longer contained by borders. The struggle between local gangs and the Albanian Mafia was quietly spreading into the United States, carried through shipping routes, financial systems, and people who believed distance could erase old enemies. Liverpool had always relied on its docks. Control of these routes meant power, and power meant survival. When the Albanian Mafia disrupted that balance, the city became a battleground of influence rather than open violence. Losses in Liverpool forced both sides to look outward. America offered opportunity, safety, and anonymity. Its massive ports and complex trade networks made it easier to hide illegal activity among legitimate business. What neither side fully understood was that by entering the United States, they were stepping into a space where mistakes carried far greater consequences. Small clues appeared first. A shipment labeled as electronic parts went missing in New Jersey, without triggering any alerts. Weeks later, a container linked to a Liverpool-based exporter was seized in California, but no charges followed. In Texas, a warehouse fire destroyed financial records just days before a routine inspection. Each incident was treated as an isolated event. Insurance companies paid claims, and officials closed reports. No one connected these moments into a single story, except those already involved in the war. Behind the scenes, old rivalries resurfaced. Money that once flowed steadily from Liverpool to overseas partners began to stall. Trusted intermediaries stopped responding. Bank transfers were delayed without explanation. These were not accidents. They were deliberate tests, probing reactions and weaknesses. The Albanian Mafia had learned patience. They no longer needed visible dominance. Control over systems was enough. Liverpool's remaining operators abroad believed they were expanding, but in truth, they were being studied. The Atlantic Ocean did not weaken the conflict, it sharpened it. In America, both sides adopted new identities. Criminal figures presented themselves as investors, import managers, or logistics consultants. They attended industry events, signed contracts, and spoke in clean financial terms. Violence became rare, replaced by paperwork and planning. This shift made the war more dangerous. Without clear enemies or obvious crimes, law enforcement had little reason to intervene. What made this moment especially fragile was arrogance. The Liverpool side believed the Albanian Mafia would struggle to adapt to American systems. The Albanian leadership believed their quiet methods would remain invisible forever. Both were wrong. By moving the war into the United States, they attracted attention from agencies trained to watch patterns rather than people. Every missing shipment, delayed payment, and unexplained fire added a piece to a larger puzzle. The war had officially crossed the ocean, but it had also entered a phase where survival depended on secrecy. No one realized yet that this new battlefield would eventually destroy not just individuals, but entire networks built over decades. Marcus Hale did not arrive in the United States as a criminal figure. On paper, he was a logistics consultant, with experience in European ports, someone hired to streamline operations and reduce losses. His early years in Liverpool had taught him how goods moved, where systems were weak, and how small changes could redirect millions without drawing attention. When the conflict at home intensified, Marcus was sent across the Atlantic to protect what remained of Liverpool's overseas interests. He saw the move as a promotion, not an escape. In America, Marcus worked carefully. He registered companies under neutral names, partnered with legitimate investors, and leased warehouses near major transport hubs. Everything he touched appeared organized and legal. Unlike others who relied on intimidation, Marcus relied on structure. He created layers between himself and the shipments, using third-party contractors and automated systems. To outside observers, he was simply another ambitious businessman, taking advantage of global trade. Success came quickly. Profits stabilized, routes reopened, and Liverpool's presence in American ports grew stronger than expected. Marcus gained a reputation for solving problems without noise. When a shipment was delayed, he found a legal explanation. When documents went missing, replacements appeared. His calm approach earned trust, and trust brought access. Soon, Marcus controlled more information than anyone else in the network. He believed this knowledge made him untouchable. What Marcus failed to notice was how closely he was being watched. The Albanian Mafia had learned from earlier mistakes. They no longer attacked power directly. Instead, they observed patterns. Marcus's efficiency stood out. Every route he improved became visible on quiet ledgers, maintained far from the ports. The very systems he built to protect himself made him predictable. While he believed he was invisible, his influence created a clear map of control. As months passed, subtle problems began to surface. Contracts were approved, but payments arrived late. Longtime partners hesitated before committing to new deals. One warehouse faced repeated inspections without explanation. None of this felt threatening on its own. Marcus interpreted these issues as normal business friction. His confidence kept him from considering a deeper threat. The distance from Liverpool gave him a false sense of security. Behind the scenes, his name circulated in places he had never visited. Financial analysts, linked to Albanian interests, examined his companies, tracing ownership and cash flow. They discovered how dependent the Liverpool network had become on Marcus's systems. Rather than remove him, they decided to weaken him. The goal was not exposure, but isolation. If Marcus lost control, the entire structure would collapse under its own weight. The turning point came when a major shipping partner quietly withdrew. No explanation was given, and no alternative was offered. This single decision disrupted multiple routes at once. Marcus spent weeks repairing the damage, unaware that each fix was being anticipated. Every solution he applied revealed another layer of his operation. The trap was closing, but it remained invisible. Marcus still believed he was in control. He had no criminal record, no direct link to violence, and no obvious enemies. Yet his rise had made him the most valuable target in a war that no longer needed weapons. In the United States, Marcus Hale had become the center of Liverpool's survival, and that made his eventual fall inevitable. While Marcus Hale focused on maintaining his influence, another force was spreading through the same territory with a very different strategy. The Albanian Mafia did not arrive in the United States as outsiders seeking attention. Their expansion was planned years in advance, shaped by failures they had studied carefully. They understood that speed attracted scrutiny and violence created noise. In America, silence was power. Their growth was almost invisible, hidden behind legal investments and patient observation. Arben Kodra operated from the shadows, rarely appearing on official documents. Instead of building large organizations, he encouraged small, independent units that looked unrelated. Each unit handled a different function: transport, storage, finance, or recruitment. None of them appeared criminal on their own. Together, they formed a network that could expand or disappear without leaving a clear trail. This structure made the Albanian Mafia adaptable and difficult to trace. Their first move was economic, not territorial. They purchased struggling trucking companies and underused storage facilities near major ports. These businesses had existing licenses, local employees, and clean records. By improving operations and paying debts, the Albanians gained goodwill in the community. Authorities saw revitalization, not infiltration. This careful approach allowed them to position themselves along the same routes Marcus Hale relied on without confrontation. At the same time, they invested in nightlife venues and small import firms. These businesses created steady cash flow and social access. Information moved faster in casual environments than in boardrooms. Schedules, partnerships, and internal disputes became known without anyone realizing they were being shared. The Albanian network absorbed details quietly, assembling a picture of Liverpool's overseas operations piece by piece. What made this expansion effective was restraint. Even when opportunities arose to disrupt shipments or expose rivals, Arben ordered patience. Each move was timed to appear accidental or unrelated. When a contract shifted or a route changed hands, it was explained through market conditions. Losses appeared gradual, almost natural. This prevented panic and delayed defensive reactions from Liverpool's side. As profits increased, the Albanian Mafia replaced intermediaries rather than removing them. Drivers were offered better terms. Warehouse managers received more stable contracts. Financial clerks were given incentives to prioritize certain transactions. Loyalty shifted slowly, without conflict. Marcus's network did not collapse overnight. It was hollowed out from within, leaving the structure standing but powerless. Law enforcement remained unaware of the scale of this transformation. Reports showed declining violence and improving business performance in certain areas. There were no dramatic arrests or public scandals. The Albanian Mafia thrived in this environment because it mirrored legitimate enterprise. Their success depended on appearing ordinary. The final stage of expansion focused on control of information. By influencing audits, inspections, and shipping data, Arben's group ensured that problems appeared elsewhere. Attention moved away from their operations and toward their rivals. When authorities noticed irregularities, they looked in the wrong direction. This misdirection was deliberate and carefully maintained. By the time the Albanian Mafia had secured its position, it no longer needed to compete openly. Liverpool's presence in the United States still existed, but it was surrounded. Routes, partners, and finances were all exposed. The expansion had been completed without headlines, without warnings, and without resistance. What remained was only a matter of timing before the consequences became visible. The collapse did not announce itself with sirens or arrests. It arrived quietly, disguised as routine failure. One morning, a shipment scheduled to move through a secured American port simply vanished from the system. There was no record of it leaving, no alert of theft, and no trace of forced entry. The container had been scanned, logged, and then erased. At first, Marcus Hale assumed it was a technical error. Ports lost data occasionally, and delays were common. But this disappearance was different. Within days, 2 more shipments followed the same pattern, each connected to separate companies under his control. As losses mounted, the financial strain became impossible to hide. Insurance claims were delayed without explanation. Auditors requested documents that had never been required before. Banks began reviewing accounts with unusual interest. These reactions were subtle but coordinated. Marcus spent his days responding to inquiries, rewriting reports, and shifting funds to stabilize operations. He believed that by fixing problems quickly, he could restore confidence. What he did not realize was that every response confirmed the weaknesses his enemies had already identified. Behind the scenes, the Albanian Mafia moved deeper into the structure. They did not take responsibility for the missing shipments, nor did they profit from them directly. The goal was destabilization. By removing key assets without creating evidence, they forced Marcus into defensive positions. Each defensive move exposed more of his operation to scrutiny. His once clean systems became cluttered with emergency adjustments, making patterns easier to detect. The true damage became visible when financial audits revealed inconsistencies. Shell companies that once balanced each other now showed gaps. Pains arrived from unexpected sources, while expected transfers failed to appear. These inconsistencies were not illegal on their own, but together they suggested manipulation. Regulators flagged the activity for closer review. The collapse was no longer internal. It was attracting outside attention. Marcus attempted to regain control by consolidating operations. Warehouses were merged, routes simplified, and trusted staff promoted. This decision accelerated the downfall. Consolidation reduced flexibility and created clear points of failure. When one warehouse faced sudden closure due to safety violations, multiple routes were disrupted at once. The violations were minor, but the timing was precise. Someone had prepared the conditions long in advance. As weeks passed, partners began distancing themselves. Contracts were terminated quietly, and renewal offers disappeared. These partners did not accuse Marcus of wrongdoing. They simply chose safer options. Reputation, once damaged, proved impossible to repair. Marcus realized that his influence had been built on perception as much as control. Once doubt entered the system, authority dissolved. The final blow came through the financial system. Accounts that had operated smoothly for years were frozen pending investigation. Access to operating capital vanished overnight. Employees were paid late. Suppliers demanded upfront payments. Marcus found himself unable to move goods even when routes remained open. The network he had constructed so carefully was still standing, but it no longer functioned. This collapse marked a turning point in the war. Liverpool's American operations had not been defeated by force or exposure. They had been dismantled through precision and patience. The absence of visible violence made the damage harder to understand and harder to reverse. What remained was a weakened structure, waiting for the next phase of a conflict that was far from over. The truth behind the collapse did not emerge all at once. It surfaced slowly, hidden within patterns that only became clear after the damage was done. At the center of this revelation was Ethan Crowe, a logistics planner who had worked alongside Marcus Hale since the early days of the American expansion. Ethan had been responsible for coordinating schedules, verifying shipment data, and communicating with third-party contractors. His role placed him close to the heart of the operation, yet far enough from leadership to avoid suspicion. To everyone around him, he appeared dependable, precise, and loyal. Ethan's betrayal did not begin with money or threats. It began with opportunity. As the Albanian Mafia expanded quietly, they identified individuals who controlled information rather than authority. Ethan fit this profile perfectly. He was frustrated by long hours, limited recognition, and the growing pressure of fixing problems that never seemed to end. When subtle offers appeared, better consulting prospects, future security, and protection from blame, he did not immediately accept. Instead, he listened. That silence was enough to open the door. Information was the first currency exchanged. Ethan shared nothing dramatic at first. Only routine details. Shipping schedules, maintenance windows, and compliance calendars moved across invisible channels. These fragments allowed the Albanian network to plan disruptions that appeared accidental. Each missing container, delayed payment, or failed inspection aligned perfectly with knowledge only an insider could provide. Yet no single act traced back to Ethan. The damage appeared systemic, not personal. As the situation worsened, Ethan's value increased. He began redirecting attention, suggesting operational changes that seemed logical under pressure. Consolidation, emergency transfers, and staff reshuffles all passed through his recommendations. These changes, intended to stabilize the network, actually weakened it further. Ethan's guidance created predictable patterns that his new allies could exploit with ease. Marcus trusted these decisions because they came from someone who had never failed him before. The moment of realization came too late. Internal reviews revealed that every major failure intersected with Ethan's access. IT timelines matched his approvals. Route changes mirrored his planning notes. Even the warehouse closures followed schedules he had helped design. Still, proof remained elusive. There were no direct transactions, no recorded communications, no obvious motive. Ethan had not stolen or sabotaged. He had simply guided events. When pressure intensified, Ethan disappeared from the operation. He resigned citing personal reasons and accepted a consulting role that required immediate relocation. His departure left behind incomplete files and unanswered questions. Marcus attempted to contain the damage, but without understanding the full scope of the betrayal, recovery was impossible. Trust within the network collapsed. Every remaining employee became a potential risk. The betrayal altered the war permanently. Liverpool's American branch had been weakened from the inside, not by force, but by manipulation. The Albanian Mafia did not need to destroy the structure, they had allowed it to destroy itself. Ethan Crowe was never publicly exposed, and his role remained hidden behind legal distance and professional silence. Yet his actions proved that in modern organized crime, loyalty was more dangerous than violence, and the most effective weapon was access to information. After the betrayal, the nature of the conflict changed completely. There was no longer any need for open pressure or financial sabotage. What followed was a phase designed to erase threats without attracting attention. Violence returned, but it wore the disguise of coincidence. Incidents occurred that could not be easily connected, yet together they formed a pattern of removal. The Albanian Mafia shifted from weakening systems to eliminating risks, one by one, without noise. Accidents began to increase around key locations. A warehouse supervisor, linked to Marcus's remaining routes, was injured in a late-night fall that halted operations for weeks. A transport coordinator vanished during a routine cross-state drive, leaving behind an abandoned vehicle with no signs of struggle. Fires broke out in storage units that contained outdated records, always after inspections were scheduled but before they could take place. Each event had a plausible explanation. Each one erased a piece of the past. These actions were not random, they were precise and restrained. No public threats were made, and no claims of responsibility followed. The absence of clear violence confused authorities. Without witnesses or direct evidence, cases were closed as unfortunate events. The Albanian network understood that in the United States, attention was the real danger. By keeping incidents small and separate, they avoided triggering broader investigations. Marcus's position deteriorated further as fear replaced trust. Employees refused overtime. Contractors declined renewals. People began distancing themselves from operations connected to him, not because of proven wrongdoing, but because of uncertainty. Silence became contagious. The more the network shrank, the easier it became to control. Information stopped flowing upward, leaving Marcus isolated within his own organization. At the same time, evidence began disappearing. Digital records were corrupted during system upgrades. Backup drives were misplaced. Paper files were destroyed under routine compliance procedures. Each loss removed context that could have explained earlier events. By the time investigators noticed gaps, there was nothing left to reconstruct. The past had been cleaned carefully, leaving only fragments that pointed nowhere. What made this phase especially effective was restraint. There were no mass arrests, no visible executions, and no dramatic confrontations. The Albanian Mafia avoided anything that would suggest organized activity. Their goal was not dominance through fear, but absence. If enough people disappeared from the picture, the structure would collapse quietly. Marcus attempted to hold on by cooperating with consultants and legal advisors. He believed transparency might protect him. Instead, it accelerated his exposure. External reviews brought new questions, and those questions led to agencies that had already been watching financial anomalies linked to his operations. The silence that once protected the Albanian network now began to work against both sides. By the end of this phase, the war had reached its most dangerous form. It was no longer a struggle for control, but a process of erasure. People, records, and routes vanished without explanation. The streets remained calm, businesses appeared normal, and headlines stayed empty. Yet beneath this calm surface, an entire criminal ecosystem was being dismantled piece by piece, setting the stage for consequences neither side could fully escape. The end did not arrive as a single strike, but as a sudden convergence of long-moving forces. For years, federal agencies had been tracking irregular financial behavior tied to international logistics firms. These investigations moved slowly, buried under legitimate commerce and protected by legal complexity. The war between Liverpool's network and the Albanian Mafia created stress points that made those hidden patterns visible. What neither side expected was that their conflict would expose them both at the same time. The first signs appeared in data rather than arrests. Analysts noticed repeated overlaps between companies that were supposed to be competitors. Shipping routes, financial transfers, and storage contracts intersected in ways that could not be explained by coincidence. The internal collapse of Marcus Hale's operations generated irregular filings and emergency adjustments that stood out against stable industry norms. At the same time, the Albanian Mafia's expansion left behind a quiet but consistent financial signature. Together, these anomalies formed a map. Once the map existed, action followed quickly. Warrants were prepared across multiple states, timed to prevent information leaks. The operations were designed to strike simultaneously, ensuring no warning could travel through the networks. In a single night, warehouses were sealed, offices searched, and accounts frozen. The raids were clinical, focused on documents, servers, and financial instruments rather than people. The goal was evidence, not spectacle. Marcus Hale was detained early in the operation. Investigators presented records linking his companies to undeclared overseas interests and coordinated shipping anomalies. Though he had avoided direct criminal acts, the structure he built connected him to the wider network. Years of careful separation collapsed under consolidated evidence. His belief that legality would shield him proved misplaced. Complexity had delayed exposure, not prevented it. The Albanian side reacted differently. Arben Kodra vanished before authorities could reach him. His absence was anticipated, but did not stop the operation. Those beneath him lacked the knowledge and independence to maintain control. Without central coordination, their network fragmented rapidly. Key financial officers were arrested, and front businesses were shut down. The silence that once protected them now ensured no one came forward to defend or explain the system. What followed was not victory for either side, but mutual destruction. Liverpool's American operations were dismantled completely. Assets were seized, partnerships dissolved, and remaining personnel distanced themselves to avoid prosecution. The Albanian Mafia lost its foothold as well. Without access to funds or infrastructure, their influence collapsed into isolated remnants. Publicly, the case was presented as a success against international organized crime. Officials highlighted seized assets and disrupted routes. What remained unspoken was how close both networks had come to surviving. It was the conflict between them that created visibility. Without the war, both might have continued unnoticed. As legal proceedings began, the true cost became clear. Decades of planning, investment, and secrecy were undone in weeks. Neither side controlled the outcome. The war had ended not with dominance, but with exposure. In trying to defeat each other, both had revealed too much. The twisted conflict that crossed the ocean ended by destroying everything it touched, leaving behind empty offices, silent docks, and a lesson neither side would ever admit to learning. Even after the arrests and the dismantling of major operations, the war did not truly end. Officially, the case was closed. Headlines declared victory over international crime, highlighting the seizures of assets, frozen accounts, and the arrests that had stunned observers. Public attention faded quickly, and the story became another example of law enforcement's triumph over organized networks. But beneath the surface, smaller operations continued. The conflict had left traces that would never fully disappear. New players slowly filled the void. Local operators, some formerly peripheral figures, recognized the opportunity left by the collapse of both Liverpool and Albanian networks. They moved into transport routes, warehouses, and businesses that had once been tightly controlled. Some were inspired by the sophistication of the previous networks, adopting similar methods of secrecy and layered organization. Others were opportunistic, relying on speed and boldness rather than careful planning. The foundations of the old war were still visible, but the faces had changed. Routes and partnerships shifted to avoid detection. What had been a centralized conflict now spread into multiple, disconnected threads. Small-scale smuggling, document manipulation, and financial misdirection continued, often unconnected in appearance but following patterns learned from decades of war. The Albanian Mafia's methods, once so precise, became part of the unspoken knowledge among new operators. Marcus Hale and Arben Kodra were no longer present, but their influence persisted in strategy and caution. Despite the collapse, the infrastructure remained intact enough to be exploited. Warehouses still stood, trucks still ran, and shipping routes remained viable. Law enforcement, confident in the official closure of the case, reduced scrutiny. This created an environment where minor players could operate without immediate fear of exposure. The twisted war had taught them that patience, discretion, and indirect control could be more powerful than overt force. Every lesson learned from the Liverpool-Albanian conflict became a blueprint for survival. The psychological impact was also lasting. Former employees and associates carried knowledge of vulnerabilities, both their own and others. They understood the consequences of betrayal, the fragility of trust, and the dangers of overconfidence. Even those who left the scene quietly never forgot the fall of the once mighty networks. Rumors persisted in business circles and port communities, a shadow of the war that had spanned continents. It served as both warning and guide for anyone entering the space. The war had fundamentally changed the nature of organized crime in the regions it touched. Violence had become less visible, relicked by strategy, secrecy, and patience. Financial manipulation and information control emerged as the primary weapons. The physical battles, the dramatic confrontations, and the open threats were replaced with silent moves that could destroy empires without a shot fired. The lessons of Liverpool's twisted conflict became embedded in the systems of those who survived, whether intentionally or by chance. In the end, the story was never truly about winners or losers. It was about adaptation, resilience, and the invisible traces that human ambition leaves behind. The Albanian Mafia's quiet dominance, Marcus Hale's rise and fall, and the betrayals in between were all chapters in a larger cycle. Organized crime did not vanish. It transformed, carrying forward lessons, scars and methods into a new era. Liverpool's twisted war had ended officially, but in reality, it persisted, hidden in the shadows, ready to emerge again whenever opportunity allowed. The battle had concluded, but the system it revealed would continue quietly, waiting for the next players to step into the void.